So I would definitely say when it comes to bivocational, relationships matter. And it's not just for the students too, but the parents. And one of the advantages of bivocational, because sometimes, it's kind of the joke, you're a youth pastor. So what do? You watch YouTube videos all day and, do this, as opposed to where it's like, man, I was driving my forklift the other day and unloading this truck, and you're talking to one of the students' dads or maybe their moms, and they're in that spot and they're like, oh yeah. And so it just connects. So you have that relational connection there to where it's like, hey, I've been in this outside place. It's not, I'm just in my little Christian bubble in my office that I read in my Bible like a good Christian pastor.
Well, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the show today. This is episode 133 of the Longer Haul Youth Ministry podcast. Excited for us today as we jump into the topic of bivocational youth ministry. For the first probably 11 years of my student ministry world, I was bivocational part-time. Often working multiple jobs trying to make it work on the financial side of things while navigating ministry and trying to be effective there. So excited to be able to dive into this topic today. Tommy Burkhart joining the show to kind of talk about this. Tommy's been a longtime listener, part of the Longer Haul community here for a while. So it's cool for us to connect and then get him onto the show as we were kind of talking even outside of it, what that looks like. He's recently gone from bivocational to a full-time role. So if you're living in that land where you've taken a part-time role and they've promised you full-time one day, which we've all been there, Tommy actually did it. It actually happened there. So he'll share a little bit about that. But primarily, we're just kind of talking about how to be effective. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the advantages even of bivocational ministry? And how do you be effective and maximize your effectiveness there? So great episode today. Excited for you to jump in and hear and learn from Tommy. Lots of practical takeaways today for you regardless. And even honestly, if you're not bivocational and you're listening to this and you're thinking, man, I'm not bivocational, I'm volunteer or I'm full-time, it doesn't mean that the things we talk about aren't important for you to recognize. There's definitely things that I miss about being bivocational. There are some advantages there that I have to really work a little harder at. And it's easy to forget about some of those things. So whether you're bivocational now or not, good for you to listen, take some notes, and hopefully come away a little encouraged and equipped. So excited to hear from Tommy today. I know you'll take away a lot from our conversation. So here we are, today's interview with Tommy Burkhart.
Welcome to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, helping you survive and thrive in youth ministry. And now, here's your host, Jody Livingston.
Well, hey, Tommy, thanks for jumping on today. I'm excited to jump in and talk about some bivocational ministry, probably a topic that doesn't get talked about enough. But before we kind of jump in here, why don't you take just a minute and introduce yourself, maybe how you got into youth ministry, kind of what your role looks like now.
Okay. Yeah. So my name is Tommy Burkhart, or Tommy B, just for short. Burkhart, Swiss and spelled weird because it's European. Confuses everybody. So, it's there. But I've been in youth ministry now 15 years as of August 28th. So that was really cool. But the first 14 years were bivocational. And I kind of got plugged in like in high school, went to camp, like played sports my whole life. I didn't go to like junior high camp. I always had an excuse. I have basketball games. I have football. I have this. So when I went, it was my sophomore year of high school. And I remember I was at camp and my brothers kept saying, did you ever hear of CIY or Christ in Youth back in the day? It was one of those camps all the way out in San Luis Obispo. And pretty much, when they're praying and saying, hey, does anyone want to get into ministry or do youth ministry in particular? I don't know what it was, but I just felt God, saying, hey man, this is what you're going to do. And I didn't know where to go, how to start, what to do. So pretty much as soon as I got back from that camp, I went and I volunteered in children's ministry for about a year, almost 2 years. And then after I graduated, I went on a mission trip to Africa, and I told people I want to get into youth ministry. I'm just, figuring out school, looking at places. And when I was in Africa, I met a guy, and they just got a brand new youth pastor at their church. They're called Seacoast Grace over in Orange County. And they're like, hey, our new guy here, Ryan, he's there. And I think you'd work great with him. Like, you want to talk to him about a job? So I had no degree. I went to a Christian reform school growing up. So I had that but went and met Ryan and we hit it off. And so I got hired on as one of their, like, I wouldn't say I was the main associate youth pastor, but I was one of the youth pastors there at the time, like, or youth minister, director, all the titles. God puts you in ministry when he wants you in it. So I did that, but in the process of that too, was stern and loving parents. They say if you're out working, you're either doing full-time work and school part-time, or school full-time and work part-time, or same thing, you're just doing one or the other and you have to be doing it and stick to it. So I always just had another job. I've never been a big fan of debt either. So, when I first started going to Christian school and stuff, I would see it and, I'd get like over 10,000 in the hole. So I'd pause my education and pick up another job or work 2 jobs at a time, just to pay and afford that and then pay it off and then go back. So, that's kind of how I got plugged in, and I just been doing it for years. That was my thing. Mike Yaconelli was always one of my biggest inspirations. He would brag how it took him over 10 years just to get his bachelor's. But,
Yeah.
It's like there's more than one way to get it. And I feel like when God opens the door, he keeps it open for you. And if he wants you out, he'll gladly help you out.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So
cool.
That's kind of how I've got in and been doing it since.
Well, cool. Well, I love this. We were kind of chatting back and forth about some other stuff, like through probably over the last year or so, because we met initially through the podcast. You're in the podcast group, and we kind of jumped on a few things. And we were just talking about you were moving from bivocational into full time after
this past year
after a long season of that. And so, what would that look like to come in and tackle this idea of bivocational youth ministry? Because I do think I was bivocational for the first 11 years of student ministry at a couple different churches before I went into a quote unquote full-time role of student ministry, and look back on those days still. And man, there's things that season of ministry gave that I don't have anymore. I kind of more in the loss of some of that, but there were also challenges in that season that certainly I'm glad to not have to face now as well. So for today, here's kind of my thought. Let's tackle a little bit. Let's start with some of the challenges that come with bivocational that might be unique to that, and then we'll kind of tackle maybe some of those advantages and then some practical help for folks who might be in that spot. Does that sound good?
Yeah, totally, man.
So when you think of bivocational then in your time there, what are some of the challenges that come to mind?
I think for me at the time, especially when I was younger, so I had a very good season. I would say my first about 7 to 8 years of bivocational, I was single, so it was a little bit easier, like I could go and do my thing. I worked my other jobs. And between the multitude of jobs I had, a lot of them I tried to get the earlier hours, like the 3 a.m. or 5 a.m. shift. So that way you're off by 2, and then you're at church for the rest of the afternoon doing your thing. So it was kind of nice having the freedom in there when I was single, and I could kind of move around and adjust. The biggest thing I'd say is for your place of work, wherever that is just finding that places they're willing to accommodate you, kind of push for you and not against you. And I would even tell my bosses, I had one boss when I worked for a large grocery chain. I don't want to say the name because I don't know if we'll get in trouble on the podcast or not. There's a few of them, not bad. But I remember for him, I told him, I was like, look, man, I was one of those seasons where I was just working again to save up money to pay off school. So I just told him, hey, I'm just asking for Wednesdays off from like 12 in the afternoon till like 10 o'clock at night. And then Sunday mornings, same thing from like 7 a.m. till 12 in the afternoon. You can schedule me any other time you want, I will be here for 24 hours if you need me to, but I need to be here for this, and he was very much would push back and just kind of be like, well, you just have to work the hours we want to give you. And that's that. And for me, I eventually went to a point where I had to go to the higher ups and be like, this is for religious reasons why I'm requesting this time off. Like, this is literally my schedule of availability. I don't know why he specifically scheduled me on these days I've asked. So it was kind of a confrontation there. And then eventually he got moved out of that store and they brought in another guy And I told him kind of the same thing, like, look, like I'm not trying to be oppositional or like go against you, because same thing, like Paul, like respect the laws of the land, respect those you work for. And that I was like, I want to respect you and I want to do this, but this is what I do. And, I said, it's not like the Tommy show. I'm doing it because I want kids to think I'm cool or something, like I do it because I genuinely care for them. And he was very, very cool. He was very, he received it well. And even he told me, he's like, so you're telling me like I have a closer for like Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights? And I'm like, yeah, you do. Yeah. And so like he would book me for those times. And then, it would just work well. So finding a place that's willing to work with you is huge. From that place, I went to another grocery chain because eventually, you need to make money. So I went from there to Costco, and I'll say Costco because it's Costco. I think they won't care. If they do, I'm sorry. We can edit it.
If they're listening, they can sponsor us. That would be fantastic.
Hey, Costco, sponsor the longer haul. So with that, when I went there, it was awesome because their thing is it was a Costco. So there's two types of Costco. There's a Costco business center and a wholesale warehouse. The business center is towards like restaurants, catering companies, like if you're going to run an office or something. So like no electronics, no clothing, no alcohol, none of this other stuff that like you just, all the frou-frou stuff at Costco that makes the giant lines is gone. So it was great.
Right.
But they're closed on Sundays. So I was like, that's perfect. And then when I talked to my manager, I was like, hey, Mike, I'm just wondering, am I allowed to have these days off? And he's like, well, you're allowed 2 days off out of the week. He's like, so Sunday is already for everyone. He's like, so we'll just make Wednesday your day off. So that was awesome too. So literally it was like, I had the whole day to go in and do stuff and just focus on ministry for those 2 days. And then obviously when it came to like events or camps or things, like I told them, look, like, unless I'm sick, I'm not going to call out because you need the money.
Right.
So I was like, so I'll be here. And like, this is literally the only time I'll take off is for camp because, that's your vacation when you're bi-vocational.
Yeah. Yep.
Doing that. It's like, so I'll do that and maybe in a few events, maybe on a Friday night or something. But the other benefit was they closed by 6 p.m. So if I scheduled something, hey, we're going to start at 7, okay, cool. Run home real quick, shower, make it to church. I'd have my leaders or people there helping set up and get stuff done. And then, you go forward. So it was very, very handy and it worked really well. So, it's just working with that. And like I said, when you find a place that supports you and will get behind you on that, it's huge because when you're pushing against it, man, it's just stressful. And, you'd want to be, in my opinion, like the Romans 14 approach with Paul. Like you're not looking to start confrontation with fellow believers, but also apply it to non-believers too. You're not looking just to go out of your way to make their life miserable for no reason. You're trying to, hey, how can I work with you to do this? Like, help me help you so I can help people.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's kind of that. So that was one of my bigger challenges.
Yeah, I think time is always a big one. No, you're good. I think time's always a challenge. Like I think, I can think for a good chunk of time, when I first started, I was part-time and I was in college. And so I was working in an after-school program for the YMCA part-time and then kind of stayed there, ended up kind of, okay, now I'm still part-time, but now I'm kind of running after-school programs, still doing church part-time, right? So bi-vocational there. Then ended up going full-time at the Y as a teen director, working with middle school students. And at that point, I'm full-time. I'm running, after-school programs, camps. We're taking our own mission trips. We're doing leadership stuff. So it's like everything I'm doing at the church, I'm also doing at the YMCA. But the YMCA this YMCA was massive in terms of scope and scale. So it felt competing, right? And so at a certain point, I felt really convinced. And what's funny is they would ask me every year, like, hey, what is your long-term goal here? Like, what are some things? Where do you see yourself in the organization, in the next however long? And I would say, I see myself full-time at a church, not here, which is not the best thing to say.
Please don't fire me, but...
Yeah, probably not the best thing to say in a performance review. So that was it, but that was kind of a normal thing. And then after a while, it just became too much. We had hundreds of teenagers at the Y that we were serving on a pretty regular basis. And then I had the church as well that we were doing, and it was much smaller, obviously. That's why I was part-time. So trying to balance that. So then I rolled, I stepped away from the full-time role, and then I was working multiple part-time jobs, right? So I was working at a little manufacturing place in the morning, putting together wiring harnesses that go into robots that build cars. So I'd get up, I'd go do that, come home, grab a quick bite to eat, then I'd go drive a bus in the afternoon for a bit. Then from there, I would go and I was closing at this smoothie shop in the evenings at night. And then on the weekends, when I could, I was painting or picking up whatever odd jobs, all while doing youth ministry right at this church. And it was a lot. It was a lot, but it was a good season. And I'm married with kids by that point, right? So we're also juggling family. And so the challenge of time is a very real challenge. And whether you're working a full-time job that allows you either the flexibility or the time to also work with students, or whether you're juggling multiple jobs trying to work with students, either way, that time is a factor for sure. There's no question about that.
Oh, yeah. And definitely with that, like you're saying too, like when I got married, I joke around because we got married. We're like, we're going to have kids like in 2 years. And I say my daughter snuck past enemy lines because she was a honeymoon baby, you know? Yeah. So I was just kind of like, hey man, I joked around. I was like, it's a baby maker. I shouldn't have said that. I jinxed it. Never name a bed on your honeymoon. Lesson learned. So with that though, we had like our romantic, like 2 to 3 months of marriage before we found out I was pregnant. And it's like, hey, so it was one of those things to where we had our daughter, and then just for me in that season, it's like I want to be there for my wife, right? And I don't want her just feeling like she's alone, because in Scripture it calls you, hey, your house needs to be in order, and your family's your first ministry. Oh, there's Amazon, but so your family's your first ministry, and I'm focusing on that. Like I would tell her, hey, like what do you need from me? And by this point, I was at a church called Parkcrest over in Long Beach, and I wasn't leading, but I was interning under one of my mentors. His name is Scott Schlatter. He did youth ministry. Actually, I think Chris might have him on a friend on Instagram, but he did youth ministry for I think 21 years or 22. I might be wrong, but he stepped out recently, so he did it for a good while. But I was interning from him, just kind of recovering from a situation I had at a church plant. Things didn't go so smooth, Always remember, if you work at a place, make sure you blend in with the culture. That's a big one. So, different cultures. So I was over there kind of recovering, but the way it was, again, I'd be working full time now at my other job. And then I was over there, and basically we'd be going to the 8:30 service together. Then the 10 o'clock service, I would be doing junior high. And then the 11:30 service, I'd be doing high school. And so the first half of the day, it's like, let's run all the way over to the church with the newborn, do this. Okay, I'm going to go do this now. I love you. Bye. And while she was pregnant too, like we were doing that, and it was just crazy, and it was hard on her. And it just kind of got to a point where, she's like, babe, like I need you here. Like I need you with me. And I know she's like, I'm not trying to make you choose between me or ministry. She's been very gracious in that. She knew like when we got married, kind of what the deal was. Like I'd been bivocational for so long already at that point too. She understood. So when it came to us working together, in that, she was a huge factor, even going in full time. Like we talked about it for a year, prayed about it. And she was very much on board with it, because I told her like, hey, if you're not comfortable with this, then that's first and foremost. I don't want you feeling pressured or this. She's a type 1 diabetic, and we all know churches have great insurance. So
right.
It's like, an insulin isn't cheap in California, sadly.
Nothing is cheap in California.
Yeah, exactly. So it was just one of those things to where we prayed about it, and it went well. But so at the time when she needed me, I felt bad, but I went to my mentor and I told him, hey, dude, like I love you and thank you for harboring me here and just letting me kind of recover, in the shallows before I dive back into deeper waters again. But my wife needs this and I need to go. And he was very gracious and understood. So I probably took off in that time. I would have done youth ministry even longer, but I took off probably about like 7 to 9 months, somewhere between there. When our daughter, like after she was born, just to, focus at home and help. And that was like probably the weirdest season of my life ever. Like not going to a Wednesday night, just coming to church and sitting in and not leading. Right. And, it was good because I needed the time to recover too. But at the same time, I was like, this is so, and I thought maybe I'm done, or like, oh, maybe, I was like, I did a solid like 10 years. Like, that's good, God, right? Bivocational, like I put my best foot forward, and then they needed help here. And I met with the youth pastor that we had at the time, and he is phenomenal. But he basically just kind of told me same thing, like, hey man, I need help. So I was like, hey dude, I'll be the Barnabas to your Paul. You want to write curriculum? Let's do it. You want to do events? Let's do it. You want to do this? Let's do it. I'll help you out. And he had only done youth ministry for 7 years, but he was full-time at that time, but he had like no training, nothing else. And then probably after like the 4th or 5th month of us working together, it was weird, but he came to me, he was just like, "Hey man, would you want my job?"
That's not a question you get every day.
Yeah. I was like, why are you trying to get out of here? So we had some good talks, but, then, picked back up in Bi-Vocational again. And so did that for another 4 years until now. And like I said, this year is my 15th year, but full time on the 15th. So
yeah,
that's cool. It's been unique.
That's cool. I think time, if you were probably to ask anybody, even folks who aren't Bi-Vocational, what do you think the biggest challenge would be? I think time would be pretty close to the top of that list. Obviously, I think money is a factor there too, often because both personal, right? Like your personal finances, but even budget typically is pretty limited.
Oh yeah. Your budget is what you get paid from your other job.
Right. You're paying it out of your own pocket.
Yeah,
and then,
pretty much.
and then I don't know about you, but like for me, I would throw expectations on that list. Like the expectations of the church often isn't less just because your pay and time and role is less. The churches will often still want a very dynamic, thriving, large, growing youth ministry. And that's sometimes just not feasible with no budget, no time, and no office, right? I remember when I got my first office, I was so excited, because they're like, "Hey, we want you to have an office here at the church." And so I was working at this church, and like, "We're going to make a space for you." I'm like, "That's great." And I'm thinking of the building. It's a pretty small building. I'm like, I don't know where I'm trying to think of where there'd even be a space to put an office here, right? And so it was like a 2-story buildings. You kind of the basement. There was so your main floor and then basement, and so when you go all the way down one hallway, go all the way down, a set of stairs comes, and it kind of a landing, it pivots and comes down, and then the hallway in the basement runs underneath it. Well, they took the closet that was underneath the stairwell, and they made that into my office. And so I was literally like Harry Potter, like under the stairs. And so not helpful. I finally convinced them. So we had some conversation there, and then they ended up turning another room that was a real room and larger into a space. But, there was no phone in my office. There was no internet. There was no, I couldn't do anything. I'm just sitting in this room surrounded by books. But the expectation was there's an office now and you're going to work from the church. And so sometimes, and even the time-wise, like I was putting in plenty of time, but it wasn't necessarily always consistent week to week because I was having to work other jobs outside of that. So the expectation coupled with the time and the budget really was a pretty big challenge.
I had that happen. So with the church I mentioned earlier, and like, I always feel bad talking because like, I'm not trying to knock them, like I love those guys. They're still doing Jesus and it's great. But my experience there was the same thing. I joked around with one of my best friends because he had his master's, but he was working at a museum. And I was like, "Hey man, I have an office. What do you have?" So like I would joke around with him that way. But when it came down to it, I know when I would talk about things like budget, I remember I didn't ask for an increase of my budget, but I made just more line items on it just to show like, hey, this is what I like to be spending on towards. These are my goals to kind of give my expectations of what, I want to see happen in the youth ministry and do it. And I remember my pastor pulled me in and he was mad and he was like, "Why are you asking for a bigger budget?" And I was like, "I'm not. Like, if you add it all up, it's still only this much." I'm not. Right. I was like, if you give me one, cool. Like I'm flattered. But I was just like, I'm just trying to figure this out and do this within the means you've given me. And he would tell me the same thing when I did youth ministry. I'd pay out of pocket and I'd do this, and I was like, cool. Like I'm doing it too, and I get it, and I respect that. I'm like, but there's some things. We have to go rent a bus. I don't have the money to go and do that, or we need to get this. It's like, that's hard. So we had a few hard talks about that, and when things would come to it, and I just told him, like, I'm not trying to be disrespectful or be rude to you, but like I'm just being as transparent as possible without trying to like make it seem like I'm not trying to be like an Absalom to David in that moment where it's like, hey, I'm trying to scheme against you or do this. It's like I'm just being transparent, and I feel like my hands are tied behind my back in some of these situations. And I was like, so I don't know what you want me to do or how you want me to do it. So I'd always ask, like, what are your clear expectations, or like, what are your goals, or what would you want to have? And there's a lot of times to where, like, one of the ones that drove me crazy personally, and he's a senior pastor doing his own thing, so I get that. But he would ask me to type out my messages and give them to him, so I would. And then I'd be like, hey, did you get to read it? That's a whopping 5-page message, double spaced, nothing crazy. He'd be like, nope. And I'm like, what do you mean you didn't read it? So I get flustered, like, you're supposed to be helping investing in me and doing these things, but at the same time, like, you won't even read that. And there's times where I was tempted, and this is out of, in my opinion, a not good frustration, not a healthy one, but I wanted to write, so Jesus rode in on the unicorns and slayed the dragon, and did this just to see if he'd read it. That'd be horrible, but it was things like that would frustrate me. And so it got to a point to where I would just do it, or sometimes I'd just stop and I'd be like, well, I don't know what to do, because you don't read them anyway. And then if I ask you to double check it or do this. And so I had those expectations or hopes while being in bivocational ministry, same thing, because I'm not in school. I didn't have a professor grading my papers or looking at things. I work full time and I do this. And so it was an unfair expectation too I was placing on him. And that's something I felt could have been communicated. But I think for him trying to be like a good pastor out of the goodness of his heart, he didn't crack down on me that way. He was like, dude, I'm sorry. Like, I'm busy, but me wanting to, like, I want to grow and do better. He's a phenomenal communicator. So I was like, dude, like, I want to be like you, like that was my mindset. So, there was tension there, and it wasn't intentional. And it's like, it wasn't what I wanted to do. But it just happened. And that's something, when you're bivocational, you get too. Because same thing, when I started dating my wife, even though we're supposed to have Mondays off, I'd still come in on Mondays. I'm like, I'm single. What am I going to do? So I was going to do that. And then when I stopped doing that, he's like, hey, man, why'd you stop coming in on Mondays? And I was like, oh, like, I'm dating a girl now. And he was like, and you could tell, like, he was like, well, why are you not coming into church and working then? Like, or bring her. And it was like, caused, again, unneeded tension that wasn't there, or maybe I read too much into it and I thought it was a bigger tension than it actually was. But I was like, well, I thought I could take this day off. Like, and at the time too, like, I wasn't paid, I wasn't getting anything from them. I just wanted to help. And so that was the other thing too. When I did start getting paid, Elder asked me, what do we pay you? And I was like, Jesus points, like, woo, it's all good. and then I told him too, like, not trying to be like, oh, I'm so holy, but I was like, hey, dude, like, it's good because I just want to see the church thrive, and you guys are an awesome place. And I was helping them get their youth ministry up and off the ground. And so I was like, that's that. And I remember it was one of the most awkward things because we would meet every Wednesday, me and the senior pastor. And that Wednesday came in and I could just tell when, like, he was irritated. And I was like, oh, he seems mad, right? What did I do? What's this? And he goes, how much? I just started going back to school. He's like, how much do you pay for school a month? And I was like, $450. He's like, we'll pay you $500. I'll pay for that. And that's still a huge blessing, because it's paying for school. But you could just tell, and I was like, I promise I didn't tell them anything. I didn't ask for anything. Like, I was just being my sarcastic self, having fun. And, and I get it, because the church starting off, you need the money to go to places, or you may have ideas or things you want to do, and it's going to somewhere where you're not expecting. So, like, I can see where, same thing. If something happens in the youth room I remodeled, if something goes wrong in there, I have something in my budget. Oh, we can get new lighting or some sound equipment or this. It's like, oh, never mind. We have to fix this now instead.
Right.
So I can imagine it's something like that. And so I wasn't mad, but it's one of those things again in bivocational ministry. You're like, I'm sorry. Like, I don't know what to do here and not make you mad.
What would you say, like, if you think it back, what are some advantages to bivocational ministry? Because I feel like those are never talked about.
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the biggest advantages actually, so one of the things I've seen, and I'm not trying to knock schooling while doing this, because even right now I'm back in school again. I'm over at Vanguard doing some stuff, so I'm excited. But, I feel like when it comes to actually being in a workplace or a work environment, so like I said, when I was at Costco, I was one of their main guys running the meat department over there. It was me and two other dudes, and we were doing over like 300,000 in sales a month. And so, like, jokingly, I learned how to use Excel.
Right.
But on top of that, though, you get management training, you get people skills. You have people come in, and again, since it was Costco, what do you mean you're out of this? I can't believe you guys don't. It's like, I'm sorry, the like 100,000 other people who read our ad came and bought it before you.
Right.
My bad. So you get yelling, when they get mad, they come and yell at you. And it's like, I'm sorry, would you like to speak to the manager? And, same thing. Sometimes you get an angry parent and why did this happen to youth ministry? Or why did this happen to my kid? He's being bullied. And like, you see it sometimes, but then the other times just when you don't, some things slip under the radar. And it's like, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. But same thing. Hey, would you want to go sit down and talk with Jack about this? Like me, you, and Jack, just so we're all on the same page and we're good here. We can have that. So it was kind of things like that. And then same thing too, like what do you guys want on your budget? Like I can make a spreadsheet and say, this is what I want to do. This is for my leader training I want to invest in. This is for my students. This is for our sound equipment that I want to do. This is kind of for some remodeling and needs I just see, and then this, like just in case of emergency or something happens.
Yeah.
So it's like you get those skills. And it kind of like I would see some people come into ministry at that point, or even younger people than me. And not that they were bad at it, but when it came to, I have to do this and I just don't get it. And I'd be like, what do you mean you don't get it? Like you went to school. And so I'm automatically assuming, like, hey, the books you read should teach you this, but the difference between hands-on actually learning and doing, you get that in a work environment regardless. So like you have to do the work.
Yeah. That's so good.
That basically helps, and that carries over a ton. Cause even now there's still stuff I do to where I'm like, oh yeah, like I learned this over here, and people, that's so smart. And I'm like, well, thanks them. They wrote the book on how to do it. It's not a Tommy B original idea. It's like, this is from Costco, or this is from over here, or this is from a wire manufacturing job, like just take those things and you see it's a system and it works well and you apply it to your ministry. And if it works, okay, use it and help it thrive. Yeah.
So, I think I miss being around lost people. Mm-hmm. Right. Like I think sometimes the challenge in being full time is that you're always surrounded by Christians, mm-hmm. either other staff or folks in your church. Where when I was bivocational, the majority of my time was spent working with people who didn't know Jesus.
Exactly.
And so there was constantly opportunities for me to build relationships and to get to know people who were, just doing life. I'll know my neighbors now, but even then I have to go out of my way to get to know my neighbors, right? Like I'll know people because we tend to run in the same rhythms as humans, right? So you get to know the guy at the coffee shop, or you get to know the whoever because you see them. But even then it's just a passing relationship where as someone bivocational, I was doing a ton of ministry outside of my job just as a believer.
Oh, yeah.
And they didn't really care that I was a pastor, most of them.
No. I think the coolest part is, so I would have it actually, so the last job I worked before full-time, I was at a wire manufacturing company. And what everyone knew there, I was a Christian, and I'm very transparent when it comes to my faith. I'm like, hey, dude, like I do my best, just try to love Jesus and love him well. And, that's that. But it's funny because with certain questions or things we brought up, or ideologies even, it's like, hey, well, what does the Bible think about this? And it's like, oh, it's funny you asked. Let's talk about this now, And for me, that was kind of like the Jesus juke, to where it's like, well, you open the door, now I'm going to answer it and use, everything, it sounds kind of mean, not in a way, but like, everything in my arsenal that I do have to talk to you and persuade you for this, because you get questions in the workplace. You have guys, I was at the strip club last night doing this. It's like, oh, why do you think that's a good place to be? Right. And just challenge it, just kind of like, hey, this worldview, or, we're going to this party. Do you want to go? It's like, no, like I'd rather just go and do this, but, I'll talk to you about it, and I know mostly adults on here, some Christians drink, some don't, but it's like, hey, if you do want to go have a pint, or you want to go do this, like we can do that and talk over this, but I'm not going to sit there and be like, hey man, like let's go get plastered and then maybe we'll talk about Jesus. So I always found it very unique. And that's the biggest thing too. I think a lot of people forget that your workplace is also your mission field. Yeah. And that's something that carries over. And at the same time too, it's like iron sharpens iron. You're with your fellow believers, but when you're back out in the world, you can see, hey man, like I know it sounds like, not sound mean again, but like, are you actually cutting and you're doing the things that scripture calls you to do? Are you teaching, rebuking, correcting? Are you living in righteousness? And not like is that checklist, but just saying, hey, like, can you say, you're being set apart? while also still loving the world, but not being in it. And I think in bivocational, you really get to see that and have it happen. Cause I think, for some kids too, they go to school, they're at a Christian school, and I get it. Like I said, I grew up in a Christian school. Not everyone's Christian at Christian school, but
right.
you kind of have that thing to where it's like, oh, well, I'm here, I believe in God, and that's it. So, you can't do that, as opposed to where if you're actually going out and you're in that place now, it's like, hey, I can witness to these people. Or one of the funnest places I worked, actually, there was one person there Buddhist and another person was a Mormon. And they would always come to me with questions. They'd be like, well, doesn't the Bible say this? And I'm like, that's a Christian catch-a-phrase more than scripture.
Right,
it's a nice thought, but it's not biblical. So let's actually talk about this now. And I think the biggest thing too is knowing your scripture, because then you can say, hey, let's go look at scripture and see where it talks about this and says it. And then you can kind of guide them, look at the context, and hopefully in some way, shape, or form that seed is planted. And maybe you see it, maybe you don't, but God's going to do something with it. And I think that's the coolest part. So that's like a huge benefit.
No, I think that's great. I worked as a commercial electrician for a bit, and I was called, everybody on the job sites would always call me Rev, because they knew that I was on ministry. And so they were always asking me stuff and questions. And it was amazing how many conversations that would come up, and just life, I would get to know people. And for a lot of them, in a weird way, I was their pastor, even though they weren't believers. Mm-hmm. It was cool. And then you have a few on each that would be believers, and even just encouraging each other. Some of that was always good. So then let's talk through a little bit then practically. I want to give some helps here. What are some things practically that you would tell someone bivocational, hey, here's some help or some tips on really being effective in that capacity, in a bivocational capacity?
So I would definitely say when it comes to bivocational, relationships matter. And it's not just for the students too, but the parents. And one of the advantages of bivocational, because sometimes, it's kind of the joke, you're a youth pastor, so what do? You watch YouTube videos all day and, do this, as opposed to where it's like, man, I was driving my forklift the other day and unloading this truck, and you're talking to one of the students' dads or maybe their moms, and they're in that spot, and they're just like, oh yeah. And so it just connects. So you have that relational connection there to where it's like, hey, I've been in this outside place, it's not, I'm just in my little Christian bubble in my office. I read in my Bible like a good Christian pastor. It's like, hey, you have this, and that helps because you understand, hey, dude, I get it. You're working a 9 to 5, or some of the other ones, same thing, dude, you're working 3 a.m. to 12 also. Like, I feel you. I feel your pain.
Yeah.
So you get to have that relationship there that bridges that. And then when you have that too, same thing with the students, you can sit there and tell them, hey man, I get it. It's hard. Like, you guys are in school. It's like, wait till you get to go to work.
Right.
It's one of those things where it's like a school basically, but you get paid for it. And at the same time, if you mess up, you get kicked out. So I think that helps a ton. And so just figuring out the relationships, because that was my thing too. Like, I could sit down again with a parent and be like, hey man, how's work going? And they know that, I'm not just trying to, just pass the time. Like, so how's the cloud look today? It's like, hey, is your job going well? Are things going good? And they understand that you understand.
Yeah.
And, I feel, I'm not saying all parents, but I feel like there is a lot of blue collar workers out there these days. And, it's like white collar's good too. They're both great, but in a way, when you can just kind of connect with them on that level, I feel they're open to trusting you more, and they know you're kind of in the world and dealing with it. So I've had parents that not that it's the best advertisement I'd ever want, but I've had parents say, Tommy could take my kid to a strip club, and I know they're going to talk about Jesus. And I'm like, hey, Art, that's not cool, bro.
Yeah. Except Tommy doesn't do that. Don't spread rumors.
I'm like, Holly would never do that. But I was like, thank you. He's like, well, I'm just saying, I trust my kid because I know you deal with these things and you're good with it. And so it's like, hey man, just say, I trust Tommy with my kid.
Right. That would have been enough. But that's sufficient. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like that, but even then it's funny because you get those, like, that sounds bad, like those people, but you get the relationship with people that kind of have that mindset, or they understand. And it maybe doesn't sound the most church talk or the most orthodox, but again, you're connecting with them and they're trusting you with their kids.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of huge, I know, honestly, that's like my biggest thing there. And then too, it's managing time would be the other one, but I feel like we've talked a lot about that already. So
yeah, but
I
would say
wisely.
Just some practical things that I found helpful with time, and I've said this before. So this, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you may have heard me say this, and this holds true part-time, full-time bivocational volunteer. It doesn't matter. But I think especially as a bivocational youth pastor, it helped me a ton. My wife and I had the philosophy that we were going to bring kids along. So instead of me trying to plan extra things on top of an already busy schedule because I was working multiple jobs, we would invite them in. And so just practically, kind of here's what that would look like for us. If I had leaves that need to be raked, I would invite students over to rake my leaves, and I would buy a $5 pizza, hot and ready pizza, and I'd feed them pizza, and I'd hand them the rakes, and we would just talk. And I would learn so much and do so much life in ministry while they're doing the leaves for me. I've had students come over and help me work on cars. I've had, whatever that looks like. My wife has had girls come over and help when she was making snacks or goodies or, whatever it is that you do, invite somebody in. I rarely in the bivocational days went on any errand by myself. If I had to go to Home Depot, I was bringing a couple guys with me. If I was, I was always trying to find ways to invite them in. Our house was open often. And I know that's true for most youth pastors, but we had kids over. But I just would say you don't have to go and add things to your already busy schedule. A lot of that relational aspect that you're talking about comes just by inviting kids into something you're going to have to do anyway, or that you're already doing. I think those rhythms helps because you're going to try to fight this balance of time and money and expectation, and you're just going to lose. You're just going to lose.
Yeah, it's the same thing with that because you're pouring so much of yourself into one thing. And you're trying to, I would compare it to, you got 3 different pitchers and you're pouring one out into the other because the other one's overflowing or spilling everywhere. And then you're trying, wait, let me pour it back into here. And then before you know it, you're running empty on all of them. But I totally agree. I guess with relational ministry, I should have, I think I talk more about parents with that too, because that's kind of been my big thing here is building the relationship with the parent over here at Harvard. So that's kind of been, it's weird, not bad, but I've had it to where when I did ministry out over more towards I don't want to say full inner city, but more like suburban areas like Lakewood, Long Beach, hey, let's have a parent meeting. They're all there. When I first started here, I was like, let's have a parent meeting. And one showed up and I was like, hey, it's a start, so that's kind of my thing. But with students, same thing too. When you bring them along, I know to them or to you, it might be like, it's just literally, I'm going grocery shopping, but to them, it's like, dude wants me to go grocery shopping with them. That's sick, and they get excited. I don't know if they say sick,
Yeah, we did. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I look back, I've kind of been taking some notes here. We really said main challenge is time, money, expectations. I think there's probably more, but I think those definitely show up. The advantages of building relationships outside of that. I love your point on just practical skill development, life skill. So many things that I learned outside of the church, I use on a daily basis in my role now. That is a massive, massive advantage to that. And then I do think, even that idea of bringing them along that's true with parents too. More than ever, there is a need to lean in to parents. And I think churches are recognizing that more and more. We kind of talked about that before as well. But those relationships matter. I think, I will say too, if you're listening and you're bivocational, let me encourage you by saying you're doing better than you think you are. I think the whole time I was bivocational, I felt so frustrated at all the things that I couldn't do. And I would see other people doing, and I was like, oh man, I wish I could do that. Or one day, and the reality was I became full-time and I don't have any more time. It's just different. All my time now is shifted around. And so we were kind of, even before we started recording, I do feel the loss of a lot of things from my bivocational season that I do mourn a bit, not having those relationships and just kind of that, even some of that experience, learning, consistently growing and learning in the workplace. So,
and I think I think for a lot of people, when it comes to bivocational, it's the same thing. You're still doing ministry and God still has you there for that reason. And so it's like, don't sell yourself short. There's no reason to. I know for me, I think Mike Iaconelli, same thing. I always go back to him. I love his approach, but he'd say, I'm a Kmart pastor because he wasn't ordained. He didn't have that. And so he felt almost like imposter syndrome, like I'm this person who's not here or shouldn't be here, when it's like God's still using you to do work. And, sometimes you get that feeling. It's like, well, will I ever be full time? Maybe I'm not called to this. And you wrestle with it. And I think the cool part about that too, it's like when you get to that point, I'm not saying, just because you're doubting, but kind of, you get to test the cut of your sails and actually see what it is. You can say, okay, well, this is how I can learn to thrive, or this is how I can learn to grow in this area that I feel maybe I'm not doing as well in. Or one of the constant questions I ask, I'd ask my pastor, whoever it would be, or I'd ask my leaders and even my students. It's like, hey, I know I'm doing this bivocational, so where's an area that you think I can improve?
Yeah.
And I know, sometimes you have people that are brutally honest, and you're like, well, thank you. I'm going to go cry in the corner for a little bit and I'll get over it. Then there's other ones where they tell you and it's like, hey, look, you know what? You do this great, but then I think there's something here maybe you can still work on. And I think in a bivocational area, almost in a way, because you're in another workplace too, that gives you more time to step back and reflect. Whereas opposed to full-time ministry, like I said, this year, I've officially been 9 months and 15 days in.
Right.
There's times where I've been like, this is cool, but it's like, this is even for me, like outside, like, this is so much slower. It's like, or I drive my boss crazy. Like, can I go to the bathroom, or can I go do this? And you're like, the flexibility you have is nice. It's definitely a blessing in ministry, but then it's kind of like, I almost feel if you don't structure it yourself, it's going to collapse around you, or everything's going to pile up till it's too much, or you're just not going to do anything at all and make yourself ineffective. So with bivocational, you still have that discipline that you're working on daily because you're going to a workplace, you're actively doing it, you're pursuing it, you're either hustling or just doing what you can. And that's huge. So it's like, when it comes to that, don't think, well, just because I do this, I'm not good at this now, or I'm ill equipped. Or I had one youth pastor who I worked with when I first started as a volunteer. He would tell me the same thing. He's like, dude, like, you're a youth pastor too. Like, you just don't have the title. And he's like, I appreciate you for that. And so you're like, oh, like, when he said that, it kind of clicked, like the work you bring and the things you do are still ministry, and it's a blessing to this and these kids, and the church as a whole. So definitely don't sell yourself short.
Before we kind of wrap up here, is there a resource that you'd throw out for folks?
Yeah. So obviously we talked about time a lot. There's a very good book by Frank Beeler called The Myth of Balance. And same thing, just when it comes to balancing that, because add in, maybe you work 2 jobs outside of ministry. Maybe you work 2 jobs and you're married and you're still doing ministry. Or when I was younger, same thing, I was in a band, which we called a ministry, and then I was in ministry and then school and dating, that's whatever you do, that keeps you busy. This is something that helps you kind of build a strategy. One, when it comes to balance, how it's a myth. It truly is unattainable. But, when it comes along to doing these things, like how can you include your family in the process? How do you include your students in the process? Your spouse, there's tons of great stuff in there. Like, I don't want to spoil it. I want to encourage people, if they don't like reading, it's on Audible too.
Cool.
Or audio listening places. So check that out. But I would definitely recommend it, because that's like, for me, when we had our daughter, like, there's some things in there where it's just like, hey, daddy, especially she's young, she's only 5.5 now, but when she's developing, and she knows I'm going to work, or like I'm at church or I'm working or doing this, just writing little thank you cards and asking the staff to sign it. And I go buy like a little dinosaur from the Dollar Tree, put it in there and just give her a goodie bag. And it's like, hey, thank you so much for letting your daddy spend time with us when we needed him in this season. Like when it's, Christmas, November, like, Easter, and just saying, hey, so she sees that, and it's not building that resentment towards the church, or like, they took them as that. Cause, there's a lot of people, where, we want to say church hurt, where it's like, my dad cared about church more than me, or this. And it's like, my biggest thing is like not causing that to my daughter. Yeah. Or same thing. I've literally brought her with me. I don't know how many meetings now. And my wife laughs she's like your personal assistant. I was like, yes, she is. And she'll correct me too. So, it's there. So that's a great resource.
Awesome. I'll make sure there's a link for that in the show notes for everybody who's listening. And then Tommy, if folks wanted to connect with you after this, what's the best way for them to find you?
Oh, so I'm super not popular on Instagram. No, kidding. I'm on Instagram and I love networking. If you look up Tommy Burkhart, or it's spelled Burkhardt. And the D is silent like Django. It's just in there. Like I said, it's European and Swiss. I don't know why. If you look me up, you'll find me. Bald-headed guy, tattoos, beard, not hard to miss. My profile is public too, just because, like I said, in ministry, I've always just left it open. So you can find me on there. I'm on Facebook. My email is just tommyb@theharborchurch.org. So if people have questions, or you're just, you need someone to listen while you vent about, dude, bivocational ministry is hard. Like, we got you, man.
Cool.
We're in your corner and we're rooting for you.
That's awesome. Cool. I'll put a link for that as well for folks to grab and connect with you. Well, Tommy, thanks again, though. Thanks again for jumping on. I know the topic's super helpful. A lot of folks who listen, I know, are in that bivocational role. And I think we've said it throughout. I'll just say it again. We want to encourage you not to give up. You don't have to be full-time. You don't have to be full-time to be effective. You might be more effective actually in a bivocational role. You're not in it alone. There's plenty of folks there with you trying to help. We know the challenges that are facing, and hopefully you found this encouraging and helpful. If you want to reach out to Tommy again, I'll have the links for that, for his info there on the show notes page, as well as the book that he recommended. And thanks for tuning in and listening today. We hope you have a great week. Keep running at teenagers, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast. Before you go, hit that subscribe button to keep these conversations coming. For notes, resources, and to join our community, swing by thelongerhaul.com. Stay encouraged, keep making a difference, and remember, we're in this for the longer haul. Catch you on the next episode.